Now, I'd like to ask the final question, and I'd like to return to, again, something you brought up in your your opening statement about really the overall condition of the future of the United States in terms of healthcare. What you raised here previous weeks about the mental health care available to people in the United States. And it's interesting, we recently published a report that came out on the United States titled U.S. Health in International Perspective, Shorter Lives, Poorer Health. And basically this report compares the health in the United States to, I believe it's 16 other industrialized nations, and essentially in terms of male life expectancy, the United States is ranked at the lowest of all the other OECD nations. We're less healthy and die younger. If you make it past 75, you are golden. It actually came out in the report. If you're past 75, you're basically going to live as old as Moses. But for people who are under 50, the likelihood of their dying, not just from homicides, not just from drug-related deaths, but from preventable deaths, from diseases that we can prevent, is at a high for all industrialized nations. And now this obviously is in part in the context of the flu epidemic in the United States, where, on top of high infant mortality, which this report discussed, we now have people, young infants and elderly dying of the flu. And here we are in the 21st century. But while we have the most expensive healthcare in the world, we still don't have sufficient healthcare. And I'm reminded of a report that came out from the chief of the International Red Cross on the situation in Great Britain. That was where the chief of the Red Cross was asked, do you see the possibility for unrest, violent unrest, as a result of the socioeconomic conditions in Europe? And the answer was absolutely. The answer was, and he put it very well, describing the situation of people, you could say under 50, but then largely, under 30, who have decades of their adult life in front of them. He said of these people, when you feel unfit for your society, like there's no place for you, that there's no hope, that the way you connect with the government and with your society is very off. And with the situation worsening, with poverty on the rise, with state aid, we're 4 years into a major economic meltdown. State aid, federal government aid is all being ratcheted down, taken away. That's the story of Obamacare. And you have a generation coming into adulthood, a generation in adulthood, that still has decades to live. And I mean, I'll just throw out a few more statistics that right now in the United States, almost the largest portion of people who are on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the food stamp program, are children under the age of 18. And you have similarly within that age bracket a report that just came out, I believe, yesterday, that in that under 18 age bracket, 1 in 25 youth have attempted suicide. And so this is a haunting picture of the future, and I'd just like to get your perspective.
Well, now, despite all that, I am intrinsically an optimist. I'm not an optimist in terms of what might drop on my lap. I don't believe that things generally drop on my lap unless they're friends who want me to do something good and so forth, and which I'm happy to do, unless there's something wrong with it. But the problem here is that we can cure this, and human beings can cure things by will, by policies, which are willful policies which can provide the means of the cure. Now, the destruction of society is reversible. Society's destructiveness has been reversed before. But it's never been on quite this scale, of course, nor this profundity, nor the rate of decline of a leading nation, as in the United States, or what the so-called Euro system in Western Europe and Central Europe. Nothing like this. It's a matter of will. If we will, effectively, some of us, just say, give me 5% of the population, 5% of the leading thinkers in the population, and let us make the policies which answer the definable problems of the United States today, both our own internal problems and the problems we have with other nations, share with other nations. If we were to do what, in all modesty, what I would do right now if I had my druthers on this question, I could guarantee you a policy which, if carried out, will save this nation. And if we can save this nation, we can inspire the rescue of the planet, the people of the planet. So we are not doomed to an absolutely certain predetermined destruction of humanity. We are condemned to respond to known measures which are largely known to me, known measures which will cure this problem. Now, the way that works is I saw the destruction, the real level of destruction of post-war United States in two steps. The first step was Truman. The second step was the assassination of our president. And what happened immediately, within a very short period of time, from the assassination, you began to see moral degeneration of an accelerated, unbelievable type within the U.S. population as a trend. Now, these were people who were young people, college age or somewhat younger, but originally the college age types, going to what are considered the best universities, like Columbia University and so forth. And what you found was degeneration, not with every part of the population on those universities, but with a growing activist group. It was like the riots of 1968 in Chicago. This was real degeneracy, but this had gone with a problem. What was the first thing? Drugs, strange kinds of sex, these kinds of things. And we produced a massive population of degenerates, like the degenerates who were associated with our current president. And he was the crony of these people. He was cultivated by them. And they were the degenerates. We had a whole mass, a spread, from people who had been as children. You would think they were promising young people, say 1960, 1962. You would think of these, even 64, you would think these young children are a promising new generation, despite Truman. And Truman was evil. But despite that, so that we had then the ability under the leadership of that president to rebuild something, as was shown clearly by the launching of the moon shop, NASA. At that, the very fact, the assassination of Kennedy, and the quick beginning of it frightened President Johnson, who admitted he was terrified. He said, if I don't go along with this war, they're going to shoot me next. I can see the rifles aimed at me. That's what he said. And he acted that way. He gave in, gave in, gave in. And he gave in all the way to the doors of hell for the United States. And since that time, the United States has never made a single net step in policy which did not lead to downward. We've destroyed our industries. We destroyed our technology. We've done everything. We can reverse that, because we have a moment now when a very large part of the population, I would say easily 5% of the total population, which tends to be a leading part of the population. They're the activists who will act on the basis of knowledge, will and knowledge. If we do that now, if we get through immediately, Glass-Steagall first, a credit system added to that, and then a project like NWAPA and something to rebuild the equivalent of our mass industrial capabilities before, high-tech industrial. If we do those three things and come in with protective measures to protect people who are now put in danger by these conditions they live in. In other words, immediately put one law through, cancel all this conversion of foodstuffs into oil, into fuel. Don't be fuelish. That's your dinner that's being cooked. So if we are in a position where reality before us, what could be done? And I can tell you, with the will of the upper 5% of the U.S. population, upper 5% intellectually and morally, as people who decide to become moral again, if they do that, with that kind of program, we can inspire a rescue of humanity from this nonsense. But the first thing we have to do is punish all liars. People who say they're happy when they're not happy. People who say, I admire my president, when they hate him. This is the kind of thing you have to watch out for. But if we simply now, we have the means in our hand, the physical means. If we do one thing, if we just cancel Wall Street, let it go off by itself, if it can sit on, little shade places they congregate in and try to peddle things, and they say, don't bother them, just leave them alone. But don't bail them out. That's very bad for them. It destroys their character if you bail them out. They've got to live the hard life and make it the hard way. You work their way up from the bottom. But really, seriously, if we get 5%, the upper 5% intellectually and morally, of this nation to assemble around the policies which I know have to be done now. And there's nothing, I don't think there's much I don't know about that aspect of it. If we do that, make those corrections, we as the United States, by coming back to ourselves, by making those kinds of decisions that have to be made now urgently, we can inspire the rest of the world to do likewise.
So that brings a conclusion to our webcast tonight. I would like to say before we sign off that, as most of our viewers do know, there is a bill currently in the Congress, in the House of Representatives, which was introduced by Representative Marcy Kaptur, which is H.R. 129. This is identical to what H.R. 1489 was in the 112th Congress. And our entire national organization and our entire national movement is in high gear, mobilizing for the immediate passage of H.R. 129 in the House of Representatives and an introduction of an identical bill in the United States Senate. So thank you very much for watching tonight. Thank you, Jason and Leandra, for being a part of our broadcast. And thank you, Lynn. Good night and stay tuned.